Everyone, and welcome back to another VMware Cloud on AWS Customer Success Team Office Hours. I'm, as always, Matt Vandenbeld at VCloudMatt on Twitter. Today I have with me an esteemed guest again, Mr. Will Rodbard. Did you want to say hi, Will?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Surprised you didn't say hi, Will, after I said, did you want to say hi, Will?
Haha.
But yeah, usually he does stuff like that. Anyway, as always, on our Tuesday mornings, 8 o'clock, we're here and we're available for any questions, any comments, any discussion anybody wants to have around VMware Cloud and AWS. We have our Zoom open. We have our Twitch going, Twitch TV if you're watching us there, and this will be up on YouTube afterwards. So if you're up watching this on YouTube, if you have any questions or comments, you can feel free to leave a comment there or email us at cloudcs@vmware.com or tweet at me at vcloudmatt or at Will Rodbard, and we'll definitely answer your questions and take your input and make some further sessions. A little bit of housekeeping stuff. Next week will be there won't be an office hours because we're going to be doing a webinar at the same time. We have Team Candy coming on, Mandy Botsko Wilson and Kim Delgado to go over CAS I'll show you guys here the VMware Cloud Assembly. Actually, I wanted to go to the portal. We'll do that after, but they're going to go through Cloud Assembly and the pieces and hopefully demonstrate some deploying to VMware Cloud from it. So we want to kind of let everybody know out there that while we focus primarily on VMware Cloud on AWS right now, we do cover the entire kind of suite of SaaS services, which includes HCX definitely, Log Intelligence, Network Insight, Cost Insights kind of gone now. I'm not sure why it's still showing in the portal. And Cloud Assembly, which also has pieces of the code stream, and I think there's a third piece that's coming soon. I think it's Service Broker, actually. Actually, no, a Service Broker is something different, but there's three pieces to CAS, which, for those that aren't aware, that's essentially VRA in the cloud. They are a little bit different code right now in what they offer and stuff. Actually, I don't want to spoil too much for next week. Anyway, if you want to learn more about it, again, I'm really proud and happy to have Team Candy join us to go over that. So that'll be next week. Now, this week, what I wanted to kind of talk about, and this is something that has come up recently with some of our customers. Ooh, do I leave us a 10? Nah, I won't skew the metrics. Although most people leave us a pretty good score. We're talking about when you. So there are a lot of storage profiles, right? So for people that aren't necessarily familiar with vSAN, vSAN is how we do all of our storage. Even if you do an R5 host with EBS back storage, it still gets abstracted to vSAN, right? So you'll always see things as vSAN data stores. Now, how you control all of those policies and how that configuration is done of your data on vSAN is controlled by the storage, the VM storage policies. Okay, so we look after kind of our management, as with everything with VMware Cloud. We look after our management policies. Okay, so we actually have some management storage policies in here that look after the things like the vCenter, the controllers, the NSX manager, all of those kinds of things. I also want to welcome Zach into the chat just real quick as he came in a little bit tardy. We'll give him too much. He was the last member of the team, so I guess it's apt that he showed up last. I got to call you out for that, Zach. You can say hi if you wanted to as well.
Hello.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is Zach. Um, so, so one thing that I wanted to emphasize, though, is that the compute VMs by default fall under the default policy. Kind of goes without saying, but I think it's worth mentioning. Now, this part is essentially up to you, the customer. So we give some guidance, but we actually don't force you to do anything. And so how this starts out. So we started out with a 1 node, as some customers would, and then we scaled up to a 3 node. Now, we don't change the compute policy. So I went in last night and actually changed this default storage policy to 1 failure, so FTT1 RAID 1. It was at no data redundancy. So this is important to know that we don't modify these for you. So where this will probably come into more customers is when you kick out an SDDC for the first time, you may go with a 3 node because that's kind of the current smallest. So you might just start with 3 and then eventually scale beyond that as you need to, right? But here's the thing. So if you start with 3, you cannot do RAID 5. Okay, so I can show you the difference here between the two. So, and the nice thing about this interface is it shows you. So with FTT1 RAID 1, 100 gigs of storage on the VM is actually 200 gigs of used VSAN storage. Now, this is not taking into account compression or deduplication, which will bring those numbers down a little bit slightly. But for the in order to just kind of for simplicity's sake, we'll just keep it as the numbers that they are now. So effectively double. Now, because we're a 3 node, when I try to go to RAID 5, it's actually not going to find any storage compatibility because you need 4 nodes to go to RAID 5. Okay? So when you go to RAID 5 to 4 nodes, it's not going to automatically change. Okay, this is on you. And there's some reasons for that. And this is kind of, I was talking to Will a little bit earlier around this and having some discussion. So we've had a lot of discussion internally about this because there is some background overhead that occurs changing the VMs from a RAID 1 to a RAID 5. And we just don't want to automatically kick that in on customers and have them have a potential, again, low potential, but still a potential performance hit from us automatically doing something that they necessarily don't know we're doing. Right?
Now, that comes in from obviously the fact that we're managing the platform. We don't have any awareness of what's running on that platform, right?
Exactly, right? So we don't know if this is your test dev or if this is your mission critical application or if it's just backup. We don't have awareness of that because that's your business and we don't get into, the nitty gritties of what you're actually kind of running. We give you, again, advice and we can do these kind of things. But so at the current time, we won't notify you on this. So this is something that I'm working with internally with a lot of our teams to at least put in. So we are putting in an alert now when when a host gets added automatically in the UI. So if you come into the UI, you can see an alert that says a host was added because of this, because we understand that not everybody that administers this environment is on that email list of owners that would be notified that we did this, right? So we're trying to get notification from a few sources. Right now, we send everything via email to the organization owners. But again, you might not be an organization owner as an administrator, depending on how you do all of your permissions and roles and all those kinds of things.
And Matt, just to jump in and catch that one. So you just said we automatically add a host, right? So for anybody new to VMware Cloud on AWS, there are a number of reasons why we might automatically add a host. There's obviously a cost impact to you when we add a host, but we're going to add a host so we can maintain our service levels from a storage or performance point of view, right? So you sign up to our service and we say we will give you X as a service level agreement. Now, in order for us to do that, if you fill up the data stores, we're going to have to give you more data store. And the only way to do that is to give you another host, correct?
Yes, and thank you for adding that, Will. It's a very, very good point to bring up. And so we have some more information around. So a lot of this is going to be controlled by Elastic DRS in the future. So this is an EA right now. But right now we will scale up automatically when you hit essentially 70-75% of your storage capacity, and that's for protection of VSAN integrity. There's going to be more options to do this based upon memory and CPU in the future. But currently, this is where it is on storage. So we will do this. So again, we're working on making notifications. So in the little notification bell here, you'll have added a host due to storage capacity or something like that. Again, so if you're not the owner. So we're working on more alerts there. I'm working very diligently with that team to try to get that going. Because, like I said, we're aware that A, you may not get the email, B, you might not read the email, all those kinds of things. We wanted to put it into the interface so it's nice and up there for you. So So, but again, going back to, so when you go to 4 nodes, now you can use RAID 5, which now reduces your storage used per 100 gig by 66%. Right? So now 100 gig only becomes 133 as opposed to 200. So again, there is a large amount of advantage there because a lot, as Will touched upon, and we always mention, is this is probably usually the most primary sizing constraint is around storage. So this will help reduce the number of hosts required to store your data. Okay, so that's kind of step 2. So you go from, one node with no data redundancy, obviously, because there's nowhere to put this. Then you go to a 3 node, which has FTT1 RAID 1. When you go to 4 nodes, you can have FTT1 RAID 5. Now, where it gets a little bit more complicated is when you go, well, I don't know if it's more complicated, but when you go beyond 6 nodes, you can now go to FTT2 and RAID 6. Now, and you'll see here that it actually requires a little bit more storage than that FTT1 RAID 5, but to file against our SLA, so we have our SLA published, it's, 3 nines. If we violate that SLA for you, you could file against us and we will give you credit for the time that we didn't meet our SLA. But to do that when you're beyond 6 nodes, well, 6 nodes and beyond, you need to be FTT2. Okay, so you need to be FTT2 to file against your SLA. That doesn't mean you need to be FTT2 if you're willing to mitigate some of that risk to, of not getting credits if we violate our SLA and are instead just more concerned with, maintaining a lower storage footprint. It's entirely up to you. You could even go to no data redundancy if you want. That's, again, this is on the compute workloads. This is completely up to you and the level of risk you want to take and how you want to file against our SLAs or any of those kinds of things. But so we leave this into your decision-making world and how your architectures work, how your applications work, right? If you have distributed applications that don't require data redundancy at the VM level, that everything's synchronized between them and stuff, and again, you can do this and maximize your space. That's completely up to you. But like I said, to file against our SLA, you need to be at FTT2 at 6 hosts. So we're working on putting a notification into the UI for when you hit these milestones, right? So when you hit 3 nodes, from 1, that's not that big of a thing, but more from 3 to 4 that, hey, you could use RAID 5 now. And you may want to because of the lower storage footprint. Again, you may still want to use RAID 1 for some database workloads that, some SQL logs and stuff like that perform better on RAID 1. Nice thing about VSAN, if I kind of go back a screen here, is you can have multiple policies and apply them to different VMs. So like for one of our customers, we developed 2 different Oracle policies for them, one for the logs and one for the database with different settings, right? So you can do that at that level. But what I'm talking about is just a default policy, which is really good to modify and maintain when you, like I said, when you go to these milestones. So I really kind of wanted to get that out there so that people could understand it. Now, you could also do a lot of advanced policy rules. This I wouldn't monkey around with unless you really had a really good reason to do it. And again, we did this with Oracle because there is some, advantages to having some more disk stripes, which have some more performance stuff. You may want to go with a thick provisioning or something like that, right? So there's a lot of settings. There's a lot of guidance out there. So this is VSAN again. So if you're looking for guidance on, how best to create a VSAN policy for SQL, that will apply here as well. There's really no difference between the two from that standpoint. But again, the only difference comes in that the interface is a little bit different. And we have that requirement for that FTT2 to file against our SLA. Okay, so just really wanted to bring that up because I feel like there's probably quite a few people, like I said, that start out with the 3 node, expand to 4 to 5, and then didn't didn't come back in here and change it. Now, the nice thing is when you actually do this, it applies the default. And what you'll see and I should have probably saved this for last night, is you'll see a whole bunch of non-compliance here. Now, you can kind of go one by one to apply the policy, or you can hit the reapply storage policy and it'll go through and hit it all. Now, again, we don't necessarily recommend that, because if you have 200 VMs, this will be a fairly large operation on the again, it's a background operation in vSAN, so it's not like it'll take precedence over top of active IO, but it'll definitely have an overhead impact on what you're doing. Right? So that's why we don't automatically do it, because you have 400 VMs in here and we just go, yeah, apply a RAID 5. It's going to go through and just hit them all. And again, maybe you don't want to do that. So I just really, like I said, want to talk about it because, we do a very good job, of, especially from our team, of talking a lot about network stuff. And we focused a lot on network stuff because network stuff is, I wouldn't call it the harder stuff, but it is maybe more challenging to ensure you get it right, and has, in some instances, more of an impact on the availability of the environment than some of this stuff does. Now, this stuff has an incredible impact on availability if you leave it at no redundancy, obviously, right?
So what you're talking about here, Matt, though, is with networking, often it's a case of if the networking isn't set up correctly, you can't connect, or something doesn't talk to something else. With the storage, it's more of an operational point of view. It will still work. It just might not be resilient, or it might not be as performant as you want it to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a very good point. Or you may not have the data protection level that you require.
Absolutely. Yeah,
which you won't find out until you probably need it. Which is the last time you want to find out that you didn't do this, right? And I mean, Will knows, and Aidan and I especially know, and Aidan and I used to kind of be specialists in the BCDR world, that is 99.9% of the time people found out they didn't set this up correctly was extremely too late. So don't be that guy. And I'm going to be working with Dustin to put this into our guide. So for those of us, those that made the APJ office hours last week on Thursday, or want to go watch a video, I showed off a couple of the areas where we're putting content out there for people's edification, and for where we communicate things out, both these webinars, these office hours webinars, our YouTube page, and the guide that Dustin has put together. Now, the guide that Dustin's put together, because he's very network focused, that's kind of his area, especially, he kind of focuses on that. And I want to circle back around and kind of add these storage considerations in there as well, because like I said, we don't necessarily talk about them as much because, they're not as in your face. Now, where they're in your face is this affects your bill directly. Like I said, if you keep that RAID 1 policy from when you deployed 3 hosts and you effectively double all of your storage, well, you're probably going to buy more hosts than if you switch to a RAID 5, right? I mean, that's just kind of simple math. So it affects your bottom line, but like Will said, it's not going to jump up in your face and be like, now I can't talk to this virtual machine, or now this virtual machine is offline, or what have you, right? So I just really wanted to highlight that. And like I said, you could create as many policies as you want and assign them to whatever VMs that you want, right? So you can get really granular on this, but like I said, at least modify the default when you hit these milestones, because then at least all of the new VMs will go the right way, or go the way that you set it, and then you can kind of go through and work on what you wanted to do afterwards. So like I said, you could go one by one afterwards, right? You could go in here and check this VM for compliance, and it'll tell you whether or not it is, and then you can kick it in, or as I kind of showed here, you could go into the VM policies and per virtual disk. So this one's only got one, but per virtual disk you can configure your VSAN policy. And like I said, this is really handy when it comes to things like database workloads. Now that's in my experience, and Will, and Zach can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, that's just traditionally the only times I've seen customers really modify the VSAN policies particular to a workload is for databases.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's normally driven by the database team rather than a VM admin or a typical vSphere admin sort of creating policies that they've defined. It's normally driven by the application layer.
Now, like I said, I think that we have a large amount of guidance. Sudhir, who we used to be on the same team with, and then once again, then he's now in tech marketing, but he's like our Oracle guy. Um, like I said, I worked with him with a customer, and he has a lot of guidance out there for running, for vSAN policies and compute policies as well for Oracle workloads, right? So, again, lots of information out there. All of that stuff that applies to normal vSAN, you can do in VMware Cloud as well for all those database workloads. Okay,
You could kind of look at this as a typical vSphere on-prem admin. You could kind of look at this in similar to how you look at resource pools. It's something that you set. You have to continually change as your environment grows, and it can affect performance. So it's not a initial set, leave, and it will always be the best setting for you. It's got to be part of your operational procedures to maybe go back, revisit, and make sure that VMs are sitting against the right policy.
and I agree 1,000%. And this is dependent on your workloads, your application, what you're doing, right? So if you don't care about any of these VMs and it's pure distributed applications or pure test dev, and you just want to maximize the amount of capacity for your dollar spend, you can put no redundancy in there if you want to, right? You can. We're not going to stop you from doing that. Just know that if we drop a host, that stuff goes bye-bye. And if we do something on our end to violate our SLA, you can't file against it. So, but you may want to, again, this completely depends on your workload. Now, you might have other workloads that you want to ensure all of the redundancy is as much as possible. So you go to FTT2 right off the bat and RAID 6 or RAID 1, and that's what's paramount to you. Okay, so again, this is particular to you, and this is why we don't really jump into your business there. Now, we've had some feedback, and I'd be thank you, Mr. Demon Wolf. I love VMware as well, one of our Twitch viewers. Now, we've had some feedback recently from some customers, and I'd like to get Zach and Will's opinion on this too, that they wanted us to do this, or they didn't know that this was an option, or when they looked at their one SDDC, it had RAID 5, and they looked at their others and it didn't, and they couldn't quite figure that out. So I guess where's our? I don't think we should do this automatically for our customers. So is just that notification, you think, enough then? Just putting this in the portal and saying, hey, you've gone to 4 nodes. You can now use RAID 5. Here's an article that describes this to you. Is that enough, or?
Yeah, I think maybe something that it has to be acknowledged, and maybe would reappear. So if you switched views, so the first thing you do when you log in, depending which view you're actually sitting in, which context, you see something, maybe like a banner at the top there saying, your environment has now scaled to more nodes. You now have the ability to change your vSAN policies. But then also when you go into, say, the policy window, in the within the vSphere client itself, yeah. So you go into the menu and you go to policies and profiles, and down, middle, up, yeah, middle. So you go into there.
You never see the thing when you're trying to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. So so something in there saying you now have additional policies available to you. FTT2 can now be set for maybe something like that. I think that too much will become annoying, but not enough relies on
so I think it would be
having that email, right? So
to be honest, so this is the approach that I'm taking, and again, I would love feedback on this. Is again, to Will's point, where we're aiming first is just to have a little notification here. I'll have a little alert that says, okay, something's gone on, so you can click on it and go, oh, okay, right? So that's kind of one, because that's the easiest for us to do, right? Next, I think what you're kind of talking about is maybe in here where it says ready or expires, and we put some alerts in here when we are growing, adding hosts and stuff. maybe an alert here somewhere that says you are now at 4 hosts but not RAID 5 or something, or
Yeah, potentially. Just so long as it's on the first thing you see when you log in, maybe just within vSphere. It could be at this level. It could be within the vSphere client. I guess it depends who we're targeting. But Mr. Demon Wolf has just pointed out that we have 249 CPUs in that SDDC there, and what you'll have noticed is actually that's 249 not CPUs. We're missing the
yeah.
little gigahertz off the end there. So
Yeah,
it
I don't know when they changed that, but that happened just recently,
I think
actually.
yeah, last update. I think we talked about it on the AMER call the other day.
Yeah,
So
so it's not
um,
that many. It's not that many CPUs. But I do agree with Mr. Dean Wolf that I don't even know if 1.5 terabytes of RAM is enough to make Chrome happy. Um, it may need more. Uh,
yes.
but yeah, well, maybe we could scale up. You know, um, we could scale up and add another node. But yes, I don't know when the gigahertz dropped off. It must have been the last patch, and we did raise a bug on it, so that should be fixed relatively soon. But again, yeah, I think at least if we put a notification here, because the nice thing about this too then is that we could have a nice little link that says, and then click here for how to do that and the caveats of doing that and how you should do it and kind of stuff like that. And I don't know, maybe link to this video, but um, it's definitely something that I definitely wanted to raise because I have a feeling that, um, like I said, if we go through the and I guess ours looks a little bit different than everybody else's as well because we have more options, but all customers won't have two. But I would think a lot would probably start here. And
Sorry, which icon would you like us to click on there, Mr. Demon Wolf? Matt was jumping
oh,
in.
he wants the dark mode.
Oh, dark mode. Okay.
Yeah, I am not a big dark mode fan.
It certainly
Um,
makes that banner up top stand out.
yeah, it really highlights that, which is something we're still working on. We do pay our bills around here. Um, we swear. But we're responsive to our customers, so I'll leave it in dark mode for now, and then change it back after. um, but yeah, like I said, I think it's kind of a strange thing because we have changed the operational model on customers. So I think that there is that confusion between what can I modify and what am I responsible for versus what VMware handles. And I think storage kind of falls straight into that gate. Is there no? There's a dark mode for. There we go. Okay, dark mode. This actually looks really not that nice in dark mode. Maybe it's just my personal preference. Anyway, um, and actually here you can see the number of CPUs we actually have, and the host is 36. So, uh, but yeah, I just kind of like this. We I think we definitely need that notification. I think we definitely need some more material in other places um, to highlight this kind of stuff. And so now that we've talked about the storage stuff, is there anything else you think that people may be missing when they scale from 3 to 4 to 6? I'm just kind of racking my brain about whether would there be any other considerations? Now, there could be for, say, Oracle workloads where the licensing would change when you add a host, and you could disable some cores and stuff when you create SDDCs.
Are you just talking storage policies here, or
No, I'm talking any policy. So,
oh, okay,
right, just
so you
just
could create anti-affinity policies, for example, and you have when you've got three hosts, then obviously the maximum number of VMs you can guarantee will be um, compliant with an anti-affinity policy. There is the number of hosts, right? So if you added 20 to an anti-affinity policy, then it's not going to be compliant. But as you scale out the number of nodes, you can then distribute those VMs over more hosts and become better compliant. I don't know if that's even a thing. You either are compliant or not, right? But you could have more VMs on different hosts than could previously, which is an obvious thing, but that would mean you'd have to go back in and potentially change your anti-affinity policies.
No, that's good, especially if you have stuff. Do we let people configure host groups?
So what you do, go to policies again, and you can create. So we use tags now, tags and VM groups in there. So you'd create a host profile, a compute policy, sorry, just below. Yeah, there you go. And so we've got some we were playing around with there, and you create VM host or VM anti-affinity there. So this looks not very pleasant in dark mode, I just like to say. But,
Yeah, no, it doesn't look very good.
so I guess whatever you get used to, right?
Yeah.
I'm not liking it. Maybe Mr. Demon Wolf, it's because I'm not a developer. And yes, you're right. It is an enterprise app. That's exactly what it is. So you're saying you're only working Workstation Pro. So yes, this is for the management of enterprises that are migrating workloads onto AWS, but want to carry on managing them as they do their on-premise enterprise environments within vSphere. So vSphere objects that no longer need to be changed or refactored to work natively in AWS. So just to answer your point there.
Oh, we only got Rix VMs in there. All right. So you're right. So okay, so that is something that would definitely have impact if you scaled up potentially, but I don't think you'd have to go in and necessarily.
No, you wouldn't have to update the policy for the number of hosts you add. It's just the scale that anti-affinity can apply to. So, for example, if you're scaling nodes and you have a web server that you want to set on each host, and you go from 6 to 10, you can now obviously have 10 web servers that are all on their own individual hosts.
Agreed. Okay, so that's another thing. So, is there anything else that comes to mind that would need to be modified upon adding more hosts? And I can't think of anything really off the top of my head. Again, storage is by far the biggest impact, just because of the way vSAN functions and the more features that come up. I mean, it's, in some ways you can simplistically look at each host as a disk in old RAID scenarios, right? So, you can't set up RAID 6 with just 3 disks in an array of any kind. So, but yes, I think we definitely need to work on dark mode for vCenter. Here it's not so bad.
Yeah. One thing I did just notice, actually, I mentioned resource pools earlier. If you were, let's say, if you'd been playing around in your environment and then you scaled it and it became more and more production, if you had changed your compute resource pool settings and you had put a hard limit in there and it non-expandable, well, I don't know why you would, but I've seen it done in the past. If you then added more hosts, your resource pool is not necessarily going to be running under optimal settings, shall we say.
Agreed. I think, made it quite well known that I am not a large fan of resource pools. It's a necessary evil that we had to put in here for permissions, which is usually not the way you'd ever do resource pools, but again, we didn't have any way around it. And in general, I would highly suggest people don't put resource pools in here. But it raises a very good point. Anytime the number of hosts changes, if you have done any custom resource pools, and we can kind of see some of the settings here if I put in here, if you were to especially the share values, those are the ones that really actually matter, because the total number of shares available to the resource pool will change when hosts are added.
There's also a little tick box there that says expandable on it, right? If you removed your tick box,
Yes, but again, that's not quite as much as the share
Yeah.
consideration. Now, there are a lot of really good community Power CLI scripts out there that will run in VMC that can maintain this for you. So, if for whatever reason you really do want to get into splitting up resource pools, there are instances where this is something you may want to look at if you're sharing. To save money, you're sharing production and test dev in the same environment. There are cases where you may want to use resource pools, and in that case, I would definitely go and look and leverage the community out there for these scripts that go through and maintain those share values. Okay, so
Yeah.
that is something that absolutely to me is a requirement if you're going to go the resource pool route, and that's something you just need to do. Like I said, leverage the community. You don't got to go and write all of this stuff custom. There's a lot of really good stuff out there now. But it's something that you kind of have to run as a scheduled task every day or however often you want to do it to ensure those share values are right. Um, so Mr. Dean was actually had an uncle that had a hard drive that caught fire. Now, I've only ever seen smoke once in a server, and that was because someone decided to attempt to hot plug a card that wasn't hot pluggable into a PCI slot, and that made a nice puff of smoke.
I think for me, the only I've never seen I've seen a partial flood of a data center, but the best one I've seen was somebody that had earthed a rack rung in a brand new shopping mall build out that we had to go to, and one of the engineers grabbed some of the floor tiles had been raised, so he grabbed the rack itself for support, and was thrown back across the room by about 20 feet. So not an actual data center catastrophe, but certainly a personal catastrophe for the for the engineer. Thankfully, it was all right, which is why I was laughing. But it was an interesting thing to see when we had to pick him up off the floor 20 feet away from the rack he was working on.
Yeah, those are always good stories as long as everything turns out okay in the end.
Yeah,
If not, they're not fun ones. Um, but yeah, uh, so yeah, that's a kind of really all I wanted to talk to, discuss formally today. Not necessarily a guy getting thrown 20 feet from
yeah. I just added that as a at the tail end.
that's what you're great for, Will. You know, um, but like I said, I just can't emphasize enough. As customers, you need to do some of your own due diligence. We don't do everything for you. We can't do everything for you, and we're working on ways of at least letting you know that there's actions that need to be done on certain triggers. But hopefully there is some more understanding around what at least are the options. And again, there's no requirements to do any of this, but me as a paying customer, I'd absolutely love to be using 66% less storage. Actually, I don't think it's exactly 66%, but as opposed to doubling it, I'm using 33% more. I guess it's 66% less. I'm good at math. All right, so and for 99.99% of workloads, there is going to be no performance difference between running it in a RAID 1 or running it in RAID 5. You're just going to get less storage. Or sorry, you're going to get less storage impact. And again, over and above all of that stuff, I think we can show it. I don't think we can modify it, but we do have. Actually, it'd be interesting to see because we scaled up as well. Services. We do enable deduplication and compression. Okay, so you'll get that by default anyway. Now, another thing that's kind of come up recently as well that, and I agree with you, backups are always important. I can't emphasize enough. I think there's two things that need to be looked at. So this is to me, this is a little bit more of an availability than perhaps a recoverability. So this will maintain things in the event of a host failure. I think over and above this, and that's a really good segue. I appreciate that. The Twitch chat is coming through today. You should still back this up, right? Just putting this to FTT2 and RAID 6 doesn't protect you from all scenarios. Doesn't save you if somebody decides to go and delete a VM, or a region fails, or all those other kinds of things. You still need to back this up, right? So there's a lot of backup partners where we have certified. There's more and more coming as we go. So that's kind of the second piece. This is just kind of, to me, the availability piece to protect yourself from,
this is disaster avoidance, right? Rather than,
yeah,
it plays into helping to avoid, a single point of failure.
So now, to Mr. Demon Wolf's point, and I'll repeat for everybody that's not in Twitch chat, is as long as you have cloud storage with a good provider, you're fine. See, I would caveat that a little bit, right? So if you look at all storage providers, they most likely give you some kind of SLA on that. And I think with S3, there's differing levels of availability or redundancy you can purchase. But I think they have something crazy like 9 nines or something like that they advertise for availability. But just because you put things into our cloud, specifically into this vSAN, doesn't mean it's automatically protected. And I think that there is that perception out there that if customers just put VMs into VMware Cloud, it's completely redundant and available, and we look after all the protection. That's not true. We do that for our management stack. For your compute VMs, you still need to manage what level of redundancy you want at the vSAN level, and you still need to back that up beyond that to places like S3 and stuff like that. Now, a lot of these places that have extremely high redundancy numbers don't have good performance. So that's usually the trade-off you get, right? Is, S3 is great to put certain kinds of data and certain kinds of things that may be accessed, but it's nowhere near vSAN, level performance. So absolutely, like I said, it's good to have not a local backup either. It's good to maybe put it in an S3 bucket that's attached, because you can save some money on data transfer. But if that entire region goes down or you lose access to that region, well, there's not much you can do, right?
You also need to worry about not just I guess people always focus on the backup, right? Let's back it up, make sure we've got it backed up, stick it on a tape, send the tape to, Iron Mountain, bury it underground. That's one side of it. But a backup is almost redundant if your recovery process doesn't work, untested, or takes too long. So there's kind of, like you were talking about there, having it really close for rapid recovery, which is great. But then maybe you'd want to consider a third stage backup, somewhere slower, further away, just to protect that data again in case you lose an entire region.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you bring that up, because there was a meme that somebody in the community created that I stole with permission. So I guess it's not stealing. Use with permission. And it's basically, we call it Schrodinger's backup. Your backup is neither alive nor dead until you kind of open the box and try to recover, because you don't know the state of that. And yes, if you're not testing your recovery, to me, you actually don't have backup, because a backup is completely useless if you can't recover it.
So I might actually dig into this one tomorrow when I run another office hours in the AMER time zone. So we might talk about this in a bit more detail tomorrow.
That'd be good. Well, excellent segue to that. Now we have lovely tools that can do this that I'm sure we'll talk about, that can facilitate this testing in a non-disruptive manner, which to me is a fantastic thing. And if companies aren't doing that, again, to me, you don't actually have backups. So again, so that's kind of, like I said, separate from this conversation, but equally important. To me, you need to have both of these pieces. You can't have either or. I mean, I guess you could go with again, it depends on your RPO and your RTOs and your your need. If you can live with a long time of destruction, you just need to keep the data around. Well, then you don't need levels of high availability, so you can go to no fault tolerance and jam this thing up and live with that longer period of data loss and a longer period of non-functioning to restore it, and that might be perfectly fine with you. Or you may be a customer that requires a multi-AZ cluster with full replication between each side, so that if an AZ drops, you're still up and running because availability is paramount to you, right? So we make all of these things available, but we can't tell you what to do. That's completely up to what your business requirements are. And I agree, Mr. Dean Wolf. I think that cloud backups has changed the game. One of our great partners, Faction, has a great solution on VMware Cloud that makes it a little bit more cost effective. Again, as looking back in my days as a VMware administrator, I would have loved to be able to do my DR to VMware Cloud as opposed to maintaining a colo, because it was a pain in the butt. You always had to get servers, load them up in the back of my car, drive them down to the colo, set everything up, patch everything there, occasionally go in there and again replace servers and stuff as time went on, and it was just this operational overhead that was a large pain in the butt that and then there was a large amount of cost that went along with maintaining this other data center. And now to be able to do that to the cloud again, has really opened up stuff, and not just that, but it's opened up the possibility of now I can DR across the country or across the world if I really wanted to, which gives a lot more flexibility into your recoverability plans. Whereas, it'd be a lot more difficult and a lot higher cost if you had to actually procure resources somewhere else, because you need somebody else to manage all that stuff for you. And you'd have to ship hardware around and all this kind of stuff. I did that once upon a time, and man, I would have loved to have this. I do love having this now, but when I was more of an administrator, this would have made my life so much simpler.
Oh yeah, think of the days and countless days in a noisy wind turbine style room, probably in the dark when the lights switch off on you half the time, and every 6 months going down and patching. Just awful times.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had to occasionally stand up and wave my arm around for the light to turn back on. Now, for those of you that prefer dark mode, I guess that's the ultimate dark mode. Working in a dark wind tunnel that's blowing cold air at you. Actually, it depends, because usually you're getting the hot air of the server being blown at you while the cold air from the floor.
Yeah. So actually, Mr. Dingwall's just raised another point about cloud backup storage targets being cheaper. Potentially, yes, they may well be cheaper. What you do have to consider is something I just mentioned before, though, and that's if you're backing up a petabyte of data to the cloud. You're going to have costs for data transit there. You're going to have costs for the storage itself. But then when you try and recover that data, how long is it going to actually take you to recover, a petabyte of data back into your environment? And especially if your environment is actually now somewhere new because your old environment is now a crater in the earth. So all these factors you just need to take into account. How much it's going to cost is one of them, but speed of that recovery, a number of factors that you need to take.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Will. I remember my first reInvent AWS's conference I went to, and this was, I guess, 3 years ago, give or take, 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. They announced Snowmobile, and I thought it was a joke. Right? They brought out this literal 18-wheeler with a huge container on the back and said, here's a way that you can move data into our data center. And it's a real thing, because it's actually faster and more cost efficient when you're moving data at that scale to actually get Amazon to drive a truck up to your data center, plug in, drive that truck to their data center, update it, upload it, and then do a sync afterwards than it is to do it over a wire. Which I thought was just amazing that they do something like that. I've heard stories of customers in this case in particular was in South Africa, where they literally used carrier pigeons with USB devices because it was faster to transfer data that way than over the internet in that country.
There are a lot of challenges in certain parts of the world around noisy lines or even lack of lines. In a number of countries I've worked in, the copper infrastructure often gets dug up once it's been laid and sold. Well, stolen first and then sold, because copper is a valuable commodity. So, yeah, in places where you can't necessarily rely on the ground to air networks, something like a data center and a truck is an absolute lifesaver.
Yeah, and like I said, I honestly thought it was a joke. But there are customers that need that kind of thing. So, but yeah, so I think we got about 10 minutes left. Like I said, I kind of covered what I wanted to go through. Is there any more questions? We could definitely answer those now. Will or Zach, was there anything? I don't want to put Will too much on the spot because he's going to be back on in I guess, I don't know,
12 hours?
12
Oh,
hours,
15
less
hours or
than 12,
something.
a little bit more than 12 hours, 16 hours, 15 hours. So I'll let him save some of his content. Zach, was there anything, any impressions you had or anything you wanted to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I don't know if you covered it. Was there any, like, maybe with VROPs, is there anything to assist with kind of making some of the storage profile decisions based on your workload history, like the IO and storage growth and stuff like that?
So I got it. Be honest, and Will, do you want to take that? Because I'm not the world's greatest VROPS
No, I'm going
expert.
to drop that like a hot break because I'm the same. I think that's a fantastic point, Mr. Double Z. I think that combining tool sets to make those recommendations, why wouldn't you? If you have something that's collecting metrics, that's showing you that you're running hot in a certain area, and you have the ability to create an automated profile to help you manage that, well, I think that's the way of the future, eh? But I
So
think that's a very useful idea.
I think that yes, absolutely, the data is there. Now, I just don't know if it goes to the level of suggesting a VSAN profile for it. And that actually is a decent point, is with lint logging. You could set up all of your own alerts now. You could set up an alert in lint that says, when a host is added, send a trap to me or send me an email. You can add an alert when I go to 6 hosts to send me an alert to change my stuff. So you could configure
Oh,
all of these own alerts
you've
right
just
now.
you've just made me think about something else actually. So we have the ability to scale up, right? We would talk about that. We also have the ability to scale down, right?
So that's the thing is I think and I didn't bring this up on purpose because I didn't know the exact answer, which is something I'm going to test later. Is I don't think it'll let you scale down if you modify this policy. So if I were to go up
No,
to
that
four,
sorry, that was the point I was going to make. Because if you base it, some of your cost predictions on utilization of the platform, on normally running with say 3 hosts, but you have some known hot times where you're gonna scale out to 20, and you change some storage policies to cope with that, then you have to be aware of that. If you try and scale back down, there's the chance that because you have these storage policies in place that won't let you go back to 3 when you don't need the extras, you might not be able to.
yes, I don't think it'll let you. That's something that I'll definitely validate afterwards, and I'm sure that there's probably some material out here I could probably Google to find the answer. But I think it's a valid point that I would only really modify these values. I guess I would go with the advice of going with the lowest common denominator if you're in that type of use case where you're going to be scaling up and scaling down a lot, right? And taking a little bit of that hit of more storage capacity being used in those times, right? So I think that is a very important thing to think about, and I'm glad you brought that up. And it's something that I think that I'll try to test later to see what happens if I try to do that. Now, also you could always go in and remodify the policy, right? So it's not like you're forever stuck. You can go in and say you went up to 4 nodes, you changed it to RAID 5, and then went, you know what, I could actually get away with 3 nodes. You can go back in, change that policy back to RAID 1, and then do it. So it's not It's not like it's a one-way trip you can't get back from, but it's definitely something that would not work in an automated fashion in that regard. Now, again, you could probably do some of your own work with the APIs available that, trigger from either VROPs or Lint or perhaps even Wavefront that says, when utilization goes below this number, run this API that changes this stuff down, and whether or not this is a great idea because, again, of the overhead, it's all possible. So, again, there's lots of options out there for people to do, and I always want to encourage people to explore those options and see what they can do themselves, because I'm always more of a believer in the old adage of teach a man to fish versus giving him a fish. Will probably make things easier, and that was kind of the whole point of this podcast. But it's definitely something I also want to check onto is, yes, does VROPS suggest a VSAN profile to you? I don't know. Anything else, Zach, now that you stumped the chumps?
No, that's just what I was wondering. I think that'd be a cool thing to have. I don't know if there was a specific VMC plugin or not for VROPS yet.
So there is a plugin for it, and there has been for quite a while, I believe. I haven't personally used it. Again, this is something I should probably work more on. I've been kind of looking more at the VROP, the Wavefront side of things than the VROP side of things. But it's definitely something that I think that's a great idea for a future webinar. We should grab Mr. Oberacher, one of our old teammates that is extremely smart in the VROps world, and a great guy on top. Maybe I'll try to rope him into doing a session with us here in a couple weeks to go over specific stuff like that. I think that's a great idea. All right, so I think without any further questions, and then, like I said, I kind of covered all that we kind of want to talk about, and it sounds like there's nothing else from whether Zach. We'll go over some of the upcoming stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, and like we mentioned throughout, the AMER office hours will be it's 10 a.m. GMT. Will, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, 10 a.m. UK time. 10
a.m. UK time. Tomorrow, or being Wednesday. Then Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, which I believe, again, is 10 a.m. in Sydney. We'll be doing another APJ office hours. Again, this is every week. We run these at the same time. So always feel free to come back and discuss things, or if you have questions or suggestions, join us every week, same times. 8 a.m. on Tuesdays for Americas, 10 a.m. in UK for EMEA, and 10 a.m. in Australia for APJ. Next week, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing a webinar on CAS and the cloud automation stuff with Team Candy, so that should be really informative and entertaining at the very least. And then another round of office hours, although next week I'll have to probably look at somebody to run this, and maybe can run the webinar for me next week, because I'll actually be at Dell Technology World. So anybody that's going to Dell Technology World, I will be in our Cloud City booth talking about stuff like this to attendees at that conference. There's actually some really cool announcements coming next week at Dell Technology World, so pay attention. There's going to be some really fun stuff that I think is really cool. And then after that, I'm looking at getting a Wavefront webinar going is kind of the next one I'm looking at running. And then from there, it sounds like VROPS is going to be a good one. I still want to bring the AWS people team on that we work with to talk about stuff like CloudFront integrations and other integrations that we can work with AWS on. So that's kind of what's coming up in the schedule. You can always, again, find us, all these recordings on YouTube. Post comments there if you have any questions. You can always email us at cloudcs@vmware.com. You can tweet at me at vcloudmatter. You can tweet at Will at Will Rodbard. And always ways to get a hold of us. We're always here to share information and answer questions. With that, I thank especially Mr. Demo for jumping into the Twitch chat and interacting with us. I appreciate everybody joining in Zoom and on Twitch and watching this recording on YouTube. I appreciate you guys spending your time with us. and hope it was of value to you. And I'll see everybody. We will see everybody tomorrow, and I'll see everybody on Thursday. Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.